An 80-year-old woman gives birth to 10 children, and what happens next amazes everyone. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. Mary had always believed that perseverance could overcome anything. Growing up in the heart of the segregated South, she learned early that life was not designed to accommodate people like her, black, female, and poor. But Mary was never one to accept the boundaries the world set for her. Her sharp mind and unyielding spirit carried her through childhood, through adolescence, and into a world where she would become a symbol of defiance and hope. Yet, for all her triumphs in life, there was one dream she had never been able to fulfill: to have children of her own. Mary was born in the 1940s into a family whose history was steeped in survival. Her father, a quiet man with rough hands, worked as a janitor for one of the wealthy white families in their small Alabama town. Her mother scrubbed laundry until her fingers bled, humming old gospel songs that spoke of deliverance and redemption. Their house was small, a modest 2-room shack on the edge of a cotton field, but it was filled with warmth. Mary's parents shielded her from the worst of the world's cruelty, but even they couldn't stop her from seeing the "whites only" signs at the soda fountain, or the way the local shopkeeper would sneer when she asked for sugar. From an early age, Mary knew she was different, not because of her skin, but because of the fire that burned within her. While other children played hide and seek under the old oak trees, Mary was drawn to books. She borrowed tattered volumes from her church library, poring over stories about heroes who overcame great odds. She imagined herself as one of them, a girl destined for greatness, ready to break the chains that had bound her people for generations. By the time she was a teenager, Mary was already making waves in her community. At 16, she organized a sit-in at the local diner where black patrons were routinely ignored or insulted. The white patrons shouted and jeered, but Mary sat at the counter, unflinching, her spine as straight as the cross around her neck. It was on that fateful day that she met James. James was a few years older, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm demeanor that belied his passion for justice. He had joined the NAACP after witnessing his own father lose a job simply for asking for fair wages. When he saw Mary at the diner, her resolve impressed him. They didn't speak that day, but their paths crossed again at a church meeting the following week. From there, a friendship blossomed into love. James and Mary married in the summer of 1964, at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Their wedding was a small affair held in the backyard of Mary's childhood home. The choir sang, neighbors gathered, and her father, tears glistening in his eyes, walked her down the aisle. Together, Mary and James dreamed of building a life that would honor their shared commitment to justice and equality. But more than anything, Mary dreamed of filling their home with the laughter of children. As the years passed, that dream remained just out of reach. Doctor after doctor delivered the same devastating news. Mary was infertile. The diagnosis felt like a betrayal, as though her body had turned against her. She tried not to let it define her, pouring herself into activism instead. She and James marched in Selma, sat in at Greensboro, and traveled to Washington to hear Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. They fought tirelessly for the rights of others, but Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from her own life. James, ever her rock, tried to console her. "We have each other," he would say, taking her hand in his. "That's more than enough." And for a time, Mary believed him. But as the years turned into decades, the ache for children only deepened. It wasn't just the absence of little feet running through the house. It was the absence of a legacy. Mary wanted to raise children who would carry on their fight, who would grow up in a world freer than the one she had known, and who would make it even better for the next generation. Their home became a gathering place for young activists. Mary mentored teenagers, teaching them the importance of resilience and strategy in the face of adversity. She treated them like the children she never had, offering advice, a warm meal, and a listening ear. But every time one of them left to start their own family, a pang of sadness would strike her heart. She kept it to herself, not wanting James to see her pain. He had his own unspoken grief after all. The years had not been kind to James. Once strong and spry, his body had begun to slow. His back ached after a long day, and the fire in his eyes had dimmed ever so slightly. Mary worried about him, but she also knew he worried about her. Their love was built on a foundation of shared burdens, and yet the weight of their unfulfilled dream was one neither of them could entirely carry. As Mary approached her 80th birthday, she found herself reflecting on her life. She had achieved so much, more than she ever thought possible for a black girl from Alabama. She had stood on the front lines of history, borne witness to change, and helped pave the way for a brighter future. But, as she sat alone in her kitchen one evening, listening to the hum of the cicadas outside, she felt the familiar ache of longing. She prayed silently, as she had done so many nights before, asking God for guidance. She didn't expect an answer. She had made peace with his silence. And yet the prayer felt different this time. As Mary whispered her plea into the quiet night, a strange warmth enveloped her. It was subtle at first, like the faintest brush of a hand, but it grew stronger, filling her with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe, if only for a moment, that miracles were still possible. The next morning, Mary awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she felt, deep in her bones, that something extraordinary was about to happen. As the sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden patterns on the worn wooden floor, Mary smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. Her journey was far from over. The sun filtered softly through the curtains of Mary's bedroom, painting the walls with golden streaks of light. She sat at the edge of her bed, her hands folded in her lap, lost in thought. The warmth she had felt during her prayer the night before lingered, as though the very air around her had been charged with something she couldn't quite explain. It was a feeling of hope, a rare, fleeting emotion she hadn't allowed herself to embrace in years. James shuffled into the room, his slippers scuffing against the hardwood floor. He carried a tray with a steaming cup of coffee, a slice of buttered toast, and a small bowl of fruit. "Thought you might want some breakfast," he said with a smile, his voice gentle but laced with concern. He had noticed the change in Mary's demeanor that morning, the faint spark in her eyes, but he didn't ask about it. He knew better than to pry when Mary was deep in her thoughts. "Thank you, love," she said, taking the tray and placing it on the nightstand. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek, her lips lingering for a moment longer than usual. "You're too good to me, you know that?" James chuckled, though there was a tinge of sadness in his laugh. "Just trying to keep you around a little longer," he replied. "You're all I've got, Mary." She didn't respond, but her heart ached at his words. She knew James had carried the same quiet grief she had for all these years. They had built a life together, a good life, but the absence of children had always left a void neither of them could fill. Still, she was grateful for him, for his steadfast love, his unwavering support, and his ability to make her feel seen, even on her darkest days. Mary sipped her coffee, her mind wandering back to the strange warmth she had felt the night before. It was silly, she thought, to put so much weight on a feeling. And yet, she couldn't shake the sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. Over the next few weeks, Mary began to feel a surge of energy she hadn't experienced in years. Her appetite grew, her steps felt lighter, and the persistent aches and pains that had plagued her body seemed to fade. At first, she attributed it to the warmer weather and the long walks she and James had started taking in the evenings. But, as time went on, the changes became harder to ignore. One morning, Mary woke to a wave of nausea so sudden and intense that she barely made it to the bathroom. She clutched the edge of the sink, her reflection staring back at her in the mirror. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead, and her hands trembled as she splashed cool water on her face. She tried to dismiss it as a stomach bug, but the queasiness lingered throughout the day. James noticed her discomfort and insisted she see a doctor. Mary protested at first, not wanting to make a fuss over what was probably nothing, but James wouldn't relent. "Humor me," he said, his tone firm but loving. "Let's just make sure you're all right." The clinic was small and unassuming, tucked away on the outskirts of town. Mary sat in the waiting room, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while James filled out the paperwork. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the sound of a distant clock ticking filled the silence. When the nurse finally called her name, Mary rose slowly, glancing back at James, who gave her a reassuring nod. The examination was routine. The doctor, a young man with kind eyes and a slightly nervous demeanor, asked her a series of questions about her symptoms before conducting a physical exam. He ordered a few tests, including a blood draw, and told her they would have the results within a few days. Mary didn't think much of it until the phone call came. It was late in the afternoon, and she was folding laundry in the living room when the phone rang. She picked it up, balancing the receiver between her shoulder and ear as she continued folding a faded flannel shirt. "Mrs. Harris?" The doctor's voice was hesitant, as though he were unsure how to proceed. "Yes, this is Mary," she replied, her brow furrowing at his tone. "Is everything all right?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I need you to come back to the clinic," he finally said. "There's something unusual in your test results. It's not urgent, but I'd like to discuss it in person." Mary's heart sank. She didn't like the sound of that. She hung up the phone and told James what the doctor had said, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "Probably just a mistake," she said, forcing a smile. "You know how these labs can be." But James could see the fear in her eyes. He took her hand in his and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The next morning, they returned to the clinic. The doctor ushered them into his office, his expression a mix of curiosity and disbelief. He gestured for them to sit and then took a seat behind his desk, shuffling through a stack of papers. "Mrs. Harris," he began, choosing his words carefully, "your test results indicate something highly unusual. Based on your symptoms and the hormone levels in your blood, it appears that you're pregnant." The room fell silent. Mary blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could you repeat that?" The doctor nodded. "You're pregnant," he said again, his tone cautious but firm. "I understand this is unexpected, given your age, but the results are conclusive. We can perform an ultrasound to confirm." Mary felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. She turned to James, whose expression mirrored her own disbelief. This can't be right," she stammered. "I'm 80 years old. How is this possible?" The doctor hesitated, clearly struggling to find an explanation. "It's extremely rare," he admitted, "but not entirely unheard of. There have been cases, though none that I'm aware of at your age. Frankly, this defies medical logic." James finally found his voice. "Is it safe?" he asked, his concern evident. "For her and the baby." "There are risks," the doctor said carefully. "Given Mrs. Harris's age, we'll need to monitor her very closely. But for now, everything appears to be progressing normally." Mary sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. She thought of all the years she had prayed for this, all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, believing it would never happen. And now, when she had long since given up hope, this miracle had been placed in her hands. As they left the clinic, James wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Mary looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also grateful. I don't know why this has happened, but I feel like it's meant to be." News of Mary's pregnancy spread quickly through the small town, and the reactions were as varied as they were intense. Some people called it a miracle, while others whispered that it was unnatural. Mary and James found themselves at the center of a storm they hadn't anticipated, but through it all, they clung to each other and to the tiny life, or lives, growing inside her. For the first time in decades, Mary felt the weight of hope in her heart, fragile but undeniable. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time. The first weeks after the doctor confirmed Mary's pregnancy were a whirlwind of emotions. Excitement, fear, and disbelief battled for dominance in her heart. Each morning, she woke with a strange mixture of wonder and trepidation, her hands instinctively resting on her stomach as though to reassure herself that it was all real. James, ever her anchor, alternated between cautious optimism and outright worry. The idea of becoming a father at his age both thrilled and terrified him. But their private emotions were soon overshadowed by the growing noise from the world around them. What had initially seemed like a private miracle quickly became a public spectacle, as news of Mary's pregnancy spread through their small Alabama town like wildfire. It started innocently enough, neighbors gossiping over backyard fences, the local grocer raising an eyebrow when Mary's changing figure became noticeable. But as the story gained traction, it spiraled out of control, leaving Mary and James at the center of a storm they hadn't anticipated. The first major blow came in the form of an article in the local newspaper. The headline read, "80-year-old mother-to-be, miracle or madness." The accompanying article was filled with thinly veiled judgment, questioning Mary's decision to carry the pregnancy to term. Though the author never mentioned her race outright, the undertone was clear. A black woman, daring to defy societal expectations, was an easy target for ridicule. James read the article aloud one evening, his voice tight with anger. "This isn't journalism," he said, slamming the paper down on the kitchen table. "It's a character assassination." Mary sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "Let them talk," she said softly. "We've been through worse." But James wasn't convinced. He knew how quickly gossip could turn to something uglier, especially in a town where the scars of segregation were still visible in the cracks of the sidewalks. "They're not just talking, Mary," he said. "They're trying to paint you as a joke, or worse, as a danger." His fears weren't unfounded. Within days, Mary began to notice the subtle ways people's behavior toward her was changing. At church, the usual warm greetings were replaced with awkward smiles and sidelong glances. The cashier at the grocery store, who had once chatted with her about recipes, now avoided eye contact altogether. And then there were the outright confrontations. One afternoon, as Mary and James walked hand in hand down Main Street, a middle-aged white woman approached them, her face twisted with disdain. "Aren't you too old for this nonsense?" she spat, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of passers-by. "It's selfish, what you're doing, bringing children into the world when you can barely take care of yourselves." James stiffened, his hand tightening around Mary's, but she raised her chin and met the woman's glare. "God gives life," she said firmly, "and if He's chosen to give it to me now, who are you to question Him?" The woman scoffed, but didn't reply. She turned on her heel and marched away, muttering under her breath. James looked at Mary, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You handled that better than I would have," he admitted. Mary smiled faintly, but inside her heart was heavy. For every person who expressed quiet support, there were 3 more who greeted her pregnancy with scorn or suspicion. And as the weeks turned into months, the scrutiny only intensified. The turning point came when a photo of Mary and James leaving the clinic was leaked to social media. The image, taken without their knowledge, showed Mary's visibly pregnant figure and James's protective arm around her shoulders. Within hours, the photo had gone viral, sparking a firestorm of online commentary. Some hailed it as a miracle, proof of divine intervention, but others were far less kind. "This is disgusting," one commenter wrote. "She's putting those babies at risk just so she can play mother at 80. Where's CPS when you need them?" Another chimed in. "Those kids don't stand a chance." The most hurtful comments, however, were those steeped in racism. Anonymous accounts spewed hateful rhetoric, calling Mary and James everything from irresponsible to a burden on society. One particularly vile post read, "Just what the world needs. More black babies growing up on welfare." James tried to shield Mary from the worst of it, but she wasn't naive. She had lived through too much to be surprised by the ugliness people were capable of. Still, the relentless negativity began to take its toll. Some nights, as she lay in bed, she couldn't help but wonder if the critics were right. Was she being selfish? Was she setting her children up for a life of hardship before they'd even taken their first breaths? One evening, as the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her, Mary turned to James. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the cicadas outside. James looked at her, his eyes soft but steady. "I think we've always done the right thing," he said, "and I think these babies are a gift, not just to us, but to the world. People might not see it now, but they will." His words gave her strength, but the challenges continued to mount. Even at the clinic, where she had initially found support, Mary began to encounter resistance. One nurse, a young woman with a perpetual scowl, made no effort to hide her disdain. During a routine checkup, she muttered under her breath, "Should have left this to the young folks." Mary didn't respond, but later, as she recounted the incident to James, her frustration bubbled to the surface. "It's like they've already decided these babies don't matter," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Like we don't matter." James took her hand, his grip firm. "They're wrong," he said simply, "and we'll prove it to them." The couple found solace in their faith, attending church more frequently, and leaning on the support of a small but loyal group of friends. Among them was Reverend Carter, an elderly black preacher who had marched alongside them during the civil rights movement. He visited their home regularly, offering prayers and words of encouragement. "God doesn't make mistakes," he told them one afternoon, his voice deep and resonant. "These children are a blessing, Mary, and the world needs them more than ever." Mary held on to those words as her pregnancy progressed, finding comfort in the belief that her children were destined for something greater. But the challenges were far from over. The hateful comments, the judgmental stares, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. They were constant reminders of the battle she and James were fighting. Still, Mary refused to let the negativity overshadow the joy she felt. Each kick and flutter from the lives growing inside her was a testament to the miracle she had been granted. And, with every passing day, her resolve grew stronger. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. As Mary and James prepared for the arrival of their children, they found themselves reflecting on the legacy they hoped to leave behind. For all the hate and ignorance they faced, they also saw glimpses of hope. Young people inspired by their story, strangers who reached out with words of kindness, and the unwavering love they shared with each other. In the face of adversity, Mary clung to one unshakable truth. Her children would be born into a world that didn't yet understand their worth. But, with the love and guidance she and James would provide, they would grow into the kind of people who could change that world for the better. Mary awoke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window pane. The room was dim, the early morning light struggling to pierce through the gray clouds. She turned onto her side, feeling the familiar weight of her belly and the faint stirring of the lives within her. It had been a long journey to this moment, and she knew instinctively that today would be the culmination of everything she and James had endured. The night before, Mary had been restless. The babies, as if sensing the anticipation, had been particularly active, their tiny movements reminding her of the miracle she was carrying. James had stayed by her side, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of fitful sleep. Now, as the rain fell and the world outside seemed to hold its breath, she felt a sudden, sharp pain ripple through her abdomen. Her breath hitched, and she clutched the edge of the bed. "James," she called, her voice trembling. "It's time." James, who had been dozing in a chair nearby, sprang to his feet. His heart raced as he helped Mary sit up, his hand steady despite the panic rising within him. They had prepared for this moment, rehearsed every step, but now that it was here, the reality of it felt overwhelming. "All right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Let's get you to the hospital." The drive to the hospital was a blur. The rain had turned into a steady downpour, and the windshield wipers worked furiously to keep the road visible. Mary focused on her breathing, each contraction growing stronger and closer together. James gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he whispered prayers under his breath. When they arrived at the hospital, the staff was already waiting. Mary had become something of a local celebrity over the past months, and the medical team had been preparing for her delivery with meticulous care. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, wheeling her into a delivery suite specially equipped for her unique case. The room buzzed with a mix of excitement and tension, the air thick with the gravity of what was about to unfold. Dr. Patel, the lead obstetrician, approached Mary with a reassuring smile. "Mrs. Harris, you've been a beacon of strength throughout this pregnancy," she said. "Now it's our turn to take care of you. We're going to bring your babies into the world safely." Mary nodded, her grip tightening on James's hand. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Always," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. The hours that followed were some of the longest of their lives. Mary's labor was intense. Her body pushed to its limits as she worked to bring each of her children into the world. The medical team moved with precision, their focus unwavering as they delivered one tiny, crying miracle after another. The first baby, a boy with a strong set of lungs, arrived just before noon. He was quickly followed by a girl, then another boy, and another. By the time the 10th baby was born, the room was filled with a symphony of newborn cries, each sound a testament to Mary's resilience and the incredible power of life. Mary lay back against the pillows, her body exhausted but her heart full. She glanced at James, who stood at her bedside, tears streaming down his face as he gazed at their children. "We did it," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're here." James leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." The next few hours were a blur of activity as the medical team worked to ensure that all 10 babies were healthy and stable. Nurses bustled about, carefully weighing and measuring each infant, while doctors monitored Mary's recovery. Despite the chaos, there was an overwhelming sense of joy in the room, a recognition that something extraordinary had just occurred. As the evening approached, Mary and James were finally left alone with their children. The babies had been placed in bassinets arranged in a semicircle around the bed, each one wrapped in a soft blanket. Mary reached out to touch the tiny hand of the nearest baby, marveling at the perfection of his delicate fingers. "They're so small," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "But they're strong," James replied, "just like their mother." The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Word of Mary's delivery spread quickly, and soon the hospital was inundated with reporters and curious onlookers. While some hailed the birth as a miracle, others continued to express skepticism and even disdain. Social media was ablaze with commentary ranging from heartfelt congratulations to cruel and ignorant remarks. Mary tried to tune out the noise, focusing instead on her children. Each one had their own distinct personality, even in those early days. The firstborn, whom they named Elijah, had a calm and steady demeanor, his tiny fists often clenched as if preparing for a fight. Amara, the second baby, was feisty and vocal, her cries commanding attention. Then there was Noah, the dreamer, whose wide, curious eyes seemed to take in everything around him. The rest of the babies, Isaiah, Micah, Naomi, Lydia, Hannah, Gabriel, and Abigail, each brought their own unique energy to the family. Together, they formed a tapestry of life and hope, a living testament to the love and resilience that had carried Mary and James through decades of struggle. Despite the joy of their growing family, the challenges they faced were far from over. The hospital stay was prolonged as doctors closely monitored the babies, ensuring they were healthy enough to go home. Mary, too, required careful observation. Her body had endured an incredible strain, and her recovery would take time. Outside the hospital, the world continued to watch. News crews camped outside, eager for a glimpse of the family. Some commentators speculated about how Mary and James would manage to raise 10 children at their age, while others used the story as a platform to air their prejudice. But amidst the noise, there were also voices of support, people from all walks of life who reached out to offer their congratulations and encouragement. Reverend Carter visited the hospital one afternoon, his presence a source of comfort for Mary and James. As he held one of the babies in his arms, he smiled warmly. "These children are a gift," he said, "and their lives will be a light in a world that desperately needs it." Mary nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. She believed that with all her heart. Her children were more than just a miracle. They were a promise of what was possible when love and faith triumphed over doubt and adversity. When the day finally came for the family to leave the hospital, Mary and James were both nervous and excited. The hospital staff lined the hallways, cheering as the couple wheeled their 10 babies out into the world. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly, as if to mark the beginning of a new chapter. As they settled into their home, Mary and James knew their journey was far from over. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but they were ready to face them together. They had been given a miracle, and they were determined to honor it, not just for themselves, but for the world that had watched them defy the odds. Each night, as Mary rocked one of her babies to sleep, she whispered the same prayer: "May you grow strong. May you change the world." It was a prayer of hope, of faith, and of love, a reflection of the unwavering belief that had carried her through the darkest of days. And in the quiet moments, as she held her children close, Mary knew that their story was only just beginning. The house was no longer silent. From dawn until the first stars emerged in the evening sky, it was alive with sound. Cries, coos, and laughter blended into a symphony of chaos and joy. Mary and James's modest home, once so still and serene, had transformed into the beating heart of their new family. 10 tiny lives filled every corner, each one demanding their own space, their own care, their own love. For the first time in decades, Mary and James felt the hum of life all around them. Yet, as much as they reveled in the miracle of their children, they couldn't escape the challenges that came with raising such a large family at their age. Each day brought new trials, testing their patience, their resilience, and their faith. Their first challenge was the logistics. 10 babies meant an endless cycle of feeding, changing, and soothing. The living room became a makeshift nursery, lined with cribs and rocking chairs. Diapers piled up faster than they could wash them, and the kitchen often looked like a battlefield of formula bottles and baby food jars. Mary, though physically worn, found herself energized by the sheer purpose these little ones gave her. James, despite his aching joints and graying hair, became a master of diaper changes and lullabies. But beyond the walls of their home, the world was far less forgiving. The public scrutiny that had surrounded Mary's pregnancy only intensified after the birth of her children. The media continued to hound them, and their story became a point of contention on talk shows and social media platforms. Critics questioned their ability to parent, citing their advanced age as a disadvantage. Others framed their family as a burden on society, perpetuating harmful stereotypes about race and poverty. Though Mary and James had always been resilient, the constant barrage of negativity began to take its toll. One afternoon, Mary ventured out to the local grocery store for the first time since the babies had come home. She had planned the trip carefully, choosing a time when the store was usually quiet. She needed supplies, formula, diapers, baby wipes, and was determined to handle the errand herself. James had offered to go in her place, but Mary insisted. "I can do this," she said firmly, though a small part of her dreaded the encounter. As she navigated the aisles, Mary could feel the stares. Whispers followed her from shelf to shelf, sharp and cutting. 2 women near the dairy section glanced her way and began to murmur, their voices just loud enough for her to hear. "Can you believe she's raising 10 kids at her age?" one said. "And you know who's going to pay for it," the other replied, her tone dripping with condescension. Mary clenched her jaw, refusing to look their way. She focused on the task at hand, selecting the items she needed and placing them in her cart. But the comments stayed with her, like tiny barbs lodged in her skin. By the time she reached the checkout line, her hands were trembling. The cashier, a young woman with dyed blonde hair, scanned Mary's items without making eye contact. When Mary handed over her coupons, the cashier frowned, scrutinizing them as though she were searching for a reason to reject them. Finally, she sighed and rang them through. "You sure you can handle all this, ma'am?" she asked, her voice flat. Mary met the cashier's gaze, her own eyes steady and unwavering. "I've handled more than you can imagine," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "And I'll handle this too." The cashier blinked, momentarily taken aback. She didn't respond, instead focusing on bagging the items in front of her. Mary paid and left the store, her head held high, but the interaction left her heart heavy. When she returned home, James noticed the tension in her shoulders. He didn't ask what had happened. He could see it in her eyes. Instead, he wrapped an arm around her and whispered, "You're stronger than they know." Despite the challenges, Mary and James found strength in their children. Each of the 10 babies had their own distinct personality, and as they grew, their individual quirks began to shine. Elijah, the oldest, was calm and observant, often watching his siblings with a quiet intensity that made Mary wonder what thoughts were forming in his little mind. Amara, his sister, was the loudest of the bunch, her cries sharp and commanding. Noah, the dreamer, had a gentle nature, content to gaze at the world with wide, curious eyes. The other children, Isaiah, Micah, Naomi, Lydia, Hannah, Gabriel, and Abigail, each brought their own energy to the family. Together, they created a beautiful chaos, a constant reminder of the miracle Mary and James had been granted. As the months turned into years, Mary and James began to see the fruits of their labor. The babies grew into toddlers, then into children, each one blossoming in their own way. Mary took great care to instill in them the values she had fought for all her life: compassion, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Elijah, with his quiet strength, often took on the role of protector, standing up for his siblings when they faced challenges. Amara channeled her fiery spirit into advocacy, even as a child, speaking out against unfairness wherever she saw it. Noah's gentle nature made him a peacemaker, always finding ways to bridge divides and bring people together. But the world outside their home remained harsh. At school, the children faced bullying and discrimination, their peers parroting the prejudices they heard at home. Teachers, though well-meaning, often underestimated them, assuming their large family and their parents' age were signs of instability. Mary and James fought tirelessly to ensure their children had the opportunities they deserved, advocating for them at every turn. One evening, as Mary tucked the children into bed, Elijah asked her a question that took her by surprise. "Mama," he said, his voice small, "why do people hate us?" Mary's heart ached at the innocence in his voice. She sat down beside him, stroking his hair as she searched for the right words. "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand," she said gently, "and sometimes they let that fear turn into hate. But you, my sweet boy, you're stronger than their hate. You are proof that love can overcome anything." Elijah nodded, though Mary could see the weight of the question still lingered in his eyes. As she kissed his forehead and whispered a prayer, she promised herself that she would do everything in her power to prepare her children for the challenges ahead. Mary and James's journey was far from over. The road they walked was filled with obstacles, but they faced each one together, drawing strength from their love and their faith. They knew the world would not change overnight, but they also knew they had planted seeds of hope in the hearts of their children, and with each passing day, those seeds grew stronger, reaching toward the light of a better future. The years passed with a rhythm that was both familiar and extraordinary. The home that Mary and James had built was no longer the same quiet, orderly house they once knew. It was alive with activity, filled with the voices and laughter of 10 children whose presence transformed every corner. Despite the challenges they faced, the love in their home was undeniable. Yet, as the children grew, so did the complexities of raising them in a world that seemed determined to challenge their worth. Elijah, the firstborn, emerged as a natural leader among his siblings. From a young age, he displayed a quiet strength, a sense of responsibility that belied his years. He often acted as a mediator during sibling disputes, his calm demeanor diffusing tensions before they could escalate. Mary watched him with pride and a tinge of sadness, knowing that the burden of being the eldest sometimes weighed heavily on him. One afternoon, as Elijah helped James repair a squeaky hinge on the back door, he asked a question that had been on his mind for some time. "Daddy, why do people look at us the way they do?" His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes. James set down the screwdriver and looked at his son. "What do you mean, son?" "You know," Elijah said, gesturing vaguely. "At school, in the store, even in church, people look at us like we don't belong." James sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. He had always known this moment would come, the moment when his children would begin to see the world's prejudices for themselves. "It's not about you, Elijah," he said gently. "It's about them. People sometimes judge what they don't understand, but what matters is how you carry yourself. You belong wherever you stand, because you're strong, smart, and kind. Don't let anyone make you feel less than that." Elijah nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. Mary, who had been listening from the kitchen, felt a swell of pride in James's words. He had always been a grounding force for their family, his wisdom and compassion guiding them through even the darkest moments. Each of their children had their own unique personality, their own way of navigating the world. Amara, the second-born, was the firebrand of the family. From the moment she could talk, she had an opinion about everything, and she wasn't afraid to voice it. At school, she often found herself at odds with teachers and classmates, her sharp tongue and unwavering sense of justice making her both admired and feared. One day, Amara came home with a note from her teacher. "Amara disrupted class today by arguing with another student about the civil rights movement," it read. When Mary asked her daughter what had happened, Amara crossed her arms defiantly. "He said Dr. King didn't do anything important," she said, her eyes blazing. "I told him he was wrong, and that he should learn more before he talks." Mary stifled a smile. "Amara," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "it's good that you stand up for what you believe in, but sometimes the best way to teach someone isn't by arguing, it's by showing them the truth. You have a powerful voice. Use it wisely." Amara considered her mother's words, nodding slowly. Over time, she channeled her passion into activism, joining school clubs that focused on social justice and organizing fundraisers for local charities. Her fiery spirit became a source of inspiration for her siblings, who often looked to her for guidance when they faced their own challenges. Noah, the dreamer, took a different path. While his siblings were bold and outspoken, Noah was introspective, often lost in his thoughts. He loved to draw, his sketches capturing the world as he saw it, both its beauty and its flaws. Mary often found him sitting by the window with a sketchpad in hand, his brow furrowed in concentration. One evening, as Mary tucked him into bed, he showed her a drawing he had been working on. It depicted their family standing together, their hands joined in a circle. Above them a bright sun shone down, its rays forming the words, "We are stronger together." "It's beautiful, Noah," Mary said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have a gift." Noah smiled shyly. "I want people to see us the way we see each other," he said. "Not as something strange, but as a family." Mary kissed his forehead, her heart swelling with love. Each of her children carried a piece of her and James within them, and together they formed something greater than the sum of their parts. Isaiah and Micah, the twins, were inseparable. They shared an unspoken bond that often left their siblings bewildered. While one finished the other's sentences, their shared curiosity led them to explore the world with boundless energy. Mary sometimes worried about their daring escapades, but she couldn't deny the joy they brought to the family. Naomi and Lydia, though close in age, were as different as night and day. Naomi was quiet and studious, her love of books rivaling even Mary's. Lydia, on the other hand, was bold and adventurous, often dragging Naomi along on her exploits. Despite their differences, they shared a deep bond, their laughter filling the house on even the hardest days. Hannah, Gabriel, and Abigail, the youngest of the 10, brought a sense of playfulness to the family. Their innocent questions and boundless curiosity reminded Mary and James of the beauty in simplicity. They were the heart of the household, their laughter a balm for weary spirits. As the children grew, so did their understanding of the world. They faced challenges that Mary and James had long feared: racism, prejudice, and ignorance, but they also found allies and opportunities that gave them hope. Each of them began to carve out their own path, their unique talents and perspectives shaping the people they were becoming. Elijah excelled in school, his quiet determination earning him respect from teachers and peers alike. Amara became a leader in her community, her fiery speeches rallying others to fight for justice. Noah's art gained recognition. His drawings featured in local galleries as a testament to the power of storytelling. The twins, Isaiah and Micah, pursued science, their shared curiosity leading them to breakthroughs in environmental research. Naomi's love of books turned into a passion for teaching, while Lydia's adventurous spirit took her to the front lines of humanitarian efforts around the world. Hannah, Gabriel, and Abigail, though still young, showed signs of following in their siblings' footsteps, their laughter and joy a constant reminder of the love that had brought them into the world. Through it all, Mary and James remained their children's greatest champions. They attended every school event, every art show, every rally, their presence a testament to their unwavering support. The challenges they faced as parents were immense, but the rewards were even greater. As Mary watched her children grow into young adults, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They were everything she had hoped for and more: strong, compassionate, and determined to make the world a better place. Together, they had overcome the odds, proving that love and faith could triumph over even the greatest challenges. And though the world still had its flaws, Mary knew that her children were the light it so desperately needed. They were her legacy, her greatest achievement, and her enduring hope for the future. The years brought change to every corner of Mary and James's life. Their 10 children, once so small and dependent, had grown into remarkable young adults, each with a unique vision of how to make the world a better place. The house that once echoed with the cries of infants now buzzed with the spirited debates and laughter of teenagers and young adults on the cusp of their futures. Mary often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The quiet moments were rare but cherished, a time for reflection on how far their family had come. James would sit beside her, his hand resting over hers, the unspoken bond between them as strong as ever. "We've done well," he said one evening, his voice filled with pride as they listened to the faint sounds of their children talking and laughing inside the house. Mary smiled. "They've done well," she corrected gently. "We just gave them a start." Each of their children had found their own path, their talents and passions leading them into the world with a sense of purpose that Mary had always hoped for. Their stories were different, yet intertwined, forming a tapestry of resilience, courage, and love. The firstborn, Elijah, had always been the steady one, his calm demeanor masking a fierce sense of justice. As a child, he had mediated disputes among his siblings with the wisdom of someone far older. That natural ability to see both sides of an argument led him to pursue a career in law. Elijah graduated at the top of his class from a prestigious law school, his determination and intellect earning him a place as a public defender. But it wasn't enough for him to simply practice law. He wanted to change it. His focus was on advocating for those who couldn't afford a voice in the courtroom, particularly those from marginalized communities. His cases often put him at odds with systemic biases, but he never backed down. Mary attended one of his trials, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom as Elijah delivered a passionate closing argument on behalf of a wrongfully accused client. His words were powerful, his conviction unshakable. When the verdict of not guilty was read, Mary felt tears well up in her eyes. Elijah had become everything she had dreamed he could be, a force for change in a world that desperately needed it. Amara's fiery spirit, evident from the time she could talk, had only grown stronger with age. She channeled her passion into activism, becoming a leader in movements for racial and gender equality. Her speeches drew crowds, her voice carrying the weight of generations of struggle and the promise of a better future. Amara's work took her to the steps of the nation's capital, where she delivered a powerful address during a rally for social justice. Mary and James watched the live broadcast from their living room, pride swelling in their hearts as their daughter stood tall before thousands. "She's fearless," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's everything I hoped she'd be," Mary replied, her hand clutching James's. Amara's work wasn't without its dangers. She faced threats and backlash from those who opposed her message, but she never wavered. She told Mary once, "If I'm not making them uncomfortable, I'm not doing enough." Noah's gentle nature and love of art had blossomed into a career that touched countless lives. His drawings, once confined to sketch pads, had grown into murals that adorned the walls of community centers, schools, and public spaces. Each piece told a story of hope, resilience, and unity. One of his most famous works depicted a circle of diverse children holding hands beneath a sky filled with stars. It became a symbol for a national campaign promoting racial harmony, and Noah was invited to speak about his work on television. Mary kept a print of that mural framed in their living room, a reminder of the beauty her son had brought into the world. When Noah visited, he often found her gazing at it, a soft smile on her face. The twins, Isaiah and Micah, had always been inseparable, their curiosity about the world driving them to explore science and technology. Together, they founded a nonprofit dedicated to creating sustainable solutions for underserved communities. Their first project, a water filtration system for rural areas, earned them national recognition. At the launch of their initiative, Mary and James stood in the crowd, their hearts bursting with pride as their sons explained the science behind their invention and the impact it would have on thousands of lives. The twins' bond remained as strong as ever, their shared vision a testament to the power of collaboration. Naomi, the quiet and studious one, found her calling in education. She became a teacher, dedicating her life to giving children the opportunities she believed every child deserved. Her classroom was a haven for learning and growth, her students thriving under her guidance. When Naomi was named Teacher of the Year, Mary and James were in the audience to watch her accept the award. Naomi's speech, filled with gratitude and humility, brought tears to Mary's eyes. "She's changing lives," Mary whispered to James, "just like I always knew she would." Lydia's adventurous spirit led her to the front lines of humanitarian efforts around the world. She worked with relief organizations in war-torn regions, providing aid and comfort to those in need. Her letters home were filled with stories of resilience and hope, her passion for helping others evident in every word. Mary worried for Lydia's safety, but she also understood her daughter's calling. "She has your bravery," James told Mary one evening as they read one of Lydia's letters together, "and your heart." The youngest of the 10, Hannah, Gabriel, and Abigail, were still finding their paths, but even in their youth, their potential was undeniable. Hannah showed a talent for music, her piano playing filling the house with melodies that lifted everyone's spirits. Gabriel, ever curious, showed an interest in engineering, while Abigail's love of animals hinted at a future in veterinary care. Mary and James watched their youngest children with the same awe and pride they had felt for their older siblings, knowing that their journeys were just beginning. As the years went on, Mary and James saw their children grow into leaders, creators, and changemakers. Each of them carried the values instilled in them: compassion, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Together, they were a living testament to the power of love and perseverance. One evening, as the family gathered for a reunion, Mary looked around the room, her heart full. The house was filled with laughter and warmth, the voices of her children and grandchildren blending into a melody of joy. James sat beside her, his hand resting over hers, a contented smile on his face. "We did it," he said softly. Mary nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "They did it," she replied, "and they're just getting started." The legacy of Mary and James's love and resilience would live on in their children, who carried the light of hope into a world that desperately needed it. Their story, once met with skepticism and doubt, had become a symbol of what was possible when faith, love, and determination came together. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had built, Mary knew that they had created something truly extraordinary. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest uploads. Share this video with your friends and family, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to check out our other videos for more inspiring and thought-provoking stories. See you in the next one.